Hello, and welcome to the lab safety slides for class. Again, you should have a fill-in-the-blank sheet that you can use to fill in the pertinent notes, or if you don't have the fill-in-the-blank sheet, you can just take notes longhand. It will give you all the same information. Here's a neat cartoon I like to begin with. The guy is saying, okay, this is a microscope and that is a Bunsen burner. That's why it's so important to know what is what in a science classroom. You can see how the guy lost an eye. Well, he put it, instead of, he was thinking he was going to put his eye up to the microscope to look in, but he accidentally put it up to the Bunsen burner and he burned his eye. So it's a funny way of saying you need to know what's going on in the classroom. You need to know what materials are what, so that way you don't make a silly mistake. And lab safety is everyone's responsibility. So it's yours, it's mine, it's everyone's. And what we want to potentially not have happen is this right here. And we never know what's going to happen in the classroom. We saw that. If you remember last fall, there's an article in the Baraboo News Republic about an experiment that went awry in Reedsburg. And the teacher ended up going to the UW as well as a student, and they had some severe burns as a result. So you never know what's going to happen in the lab. You always have to be careful. Things like "I didn't mean to" and "it wasn't my fault" are two statements that have no place in the lab. If someone is hurt or equipment is broken, these statements cannot undo the harm. And a lot of times people will tell me, well, it was an accident. Well, yeah, it was an accident. You didn't mean to do it, but if you wouldn't have been running, you wouldn't have knocked into them. Or if you wouldn't have been faking like you were throwing something at them, it wouldn't have happened. So yeah, it was an accident. You didn't mean to do it, but if you wouldn't have done certain things, the accident wouldn't have happened. Horseplay will not be tolerated. If it does occur, those involved may be given an alternative assignment or a 0 for that lab. A detention may also be issued. So lab safety is really serious in the classroom because we're going to be working with some pretty harsh chemicals this year. So it's really important to play it safe. Lack of pre-lab preparation is the main threat to safety in our lab. In other words, if you're supposed to know the notes, if you're supposed to know the content, if you don't do that, you're going to be behind. A lot of times people will ask me questions or they'll give me a comment, "I don't get it, I don't get it." And the reason why a lot of students don't get it is because they haven't done the review, they haven't read the readings, they don't know the material. It's not that I believe that they don't get it because they choose not to do what they need to do in order to get it. Keep the aisles clear so if people are walking through, they're not tripping on things. We don't have a lot of space here in the lab. At the beginning of each lab period, you'll be given a chance to ask questions. If you're not sure what to do, ask. Now, always pay close attention to the instructions because I will usually go over things orally as well as the instructions will be written, so you actually will get them in two different ways. But if you're not listening and then you decide not to read, of course you're going to make mistakes. Of course you're not going to know what to do. But that can be prevented by asking questions and listening. Know where all your lab safety equipment is. Things like the soap, sink, paper towels. It's pretty obvious you know where those are. The gas shutoff button is over by the door. If you look at that, if there's ever an emergency, you can turn, by pushing that button in, you can turn off all the gas in this room. Wear your aprons. Use brooms and dustpans to clean up materials. Use the telephone. 3021 is to call the office. So if there's an emergency and you need to call the office, please do so. The grippers and tongs we'll be using throughout the school year so you don't burn your hands with hot glassware. The goggles and the goggle cabinets. You need to wear goggles at certain times for certain labs. The fire blanket here is for emergency purposes. I've never had to use it. I hope I never will. But if you do need it, it's here and it's to smother fires. We got a fire extinguisher here. If there ever is a fire, the nearest fire alarm pole where you can get the whole building to evacuate is down near Miss Halverson's room. There's another one up in the commons where you guys eat by the doors up there. And then we have the Eyewash emergency shower. This is not in case you forget to shower and you're smelling bad. This is in case you get some chemicals in your eyes and you need to remove it. Notice that every room in this building has an emergency. When you hear it, do it. So these are just different things that you need to know, and you'll be going over these a little bit more in TA so you know what to do if there's an emergency. If you do get injured, report it to me. If you think it's worthy of reporting, report it to me. So I'm not talking about every paper cut, but if you cut yourself on glass, if you get a burn, let me know. Because a lot of times I'll hear back from parents a day or two later. It's like, oh, what happened in class? Or the principal will come and ask me because your parents called the school. They'll say, well, what happened in class? I won't have a clue as to what happened if you don't report it. Never play with lab equipment or materials. So don't just walk into the classroom and start playing with things. That's how things get broken. Always follow instructions and wait until you're told to begin before starting the lab. Never eat or smell anything in the lab. And a good reason for that is because a lot of the chemical substances we're going to be using, they're clear liquids. They look a lot like water. So if you just came in here and drank it, you could potentially die. Or don't use the glassware, because a lot of the glassware we have has been used for acids. So if you come in here and say, well, I'm going to get a drink, I'm going to use this beaker to fill it up out of the sink, and then I'm going to drink from it. You may be drinking acid with it. So don't drink the chemicals. Be safe. How about this slide? DHMO kills. That's dihydrogen monoxide. Now you might look at this and it says, well, dangers, death by inhalation, it corrodes metals, uses, it's used in animal research, torture, cult rituals, places. You find it in cancerous tumors, you find it in acid rain. And how many of you think you'd like to ban DHMO? I think we should all ban DHMO, right? Well, what does it look like? DHMO is actually water. So if you would have voted to ban water, wow, we wouldn't have been able to survive. So it's just knowing the names of different things. We can call it dihydrogen monoxide. You can call it H2O. You can call it water. So there's lots of different names for it. If you ever have to smell something, the bad way is to go up to and just take a big whiff, because if it was a strong acid, it might be burning your nose right now, or the inner lining of your nose anyway. So always waft things towards you. It's kind of like you're fanning it towards you, so you only get a small whiff of it. Never do unauthorized experiments, otherwise, things may happen. So don't look at the person in front of you and think, golly, if I light their hair on fire, how long will it take them to notice? That's not the type of experiments we're going to do in here. This is a neat cartoon here. You read it, glub, 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 boom, blows up. So what does the guy do? He does it again, glub, 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 glub. So obviously you shouldn't have done it in the first place, and then obviously you shouldn't do it a second time around. Wear safety goggles and aprons when necessary. This is going to be a really good test question for you. When are goggles necessary? 3 things: when chemicals are being used, during open flames, when hot liquids are present. And in here we don't have hot pans, so the only time we're going to have a hot liquid is when flames are open. So if you remember, if you have an open flame, if we're using the Bunsen burners, you need to have your safety goggles on, and you're going to need to wear aprons as well. And goggles are sexy. This is a poster that a student created a few years ago to just illustrate the fact that goggles are necessary. Now, are you really going to look sexy in goggles? Probably not. But what would be worse, wearing goggles or getting hurt and potentially losing your eyesight? So make sure you wear the goggles around the eyes, not around the neck or the forehead. Keep your work area clean. Dispose of materials properly. The only thing you're going to want to have back by the lab is your lab materials and a writing utensil. Don't take all of your books back there, because if something happens, if the Bunsen burner tilts, it might catch on fire, they may get wet. So just leave everything at your chair or your desk except the lab materials. Again, report all injuries or accidents to me immediately, so that way I know what's going on and I can get you treatment if you need it. You need to tie long hair back. Do not wear loose clothing in the lab. No sandals. Obviously the hair, so it doesn't catch on fire. And this, guys and girls. I've had guys who've had long hairs who've had to use rubber bands and whatnot to tie their hair back. And loose-fitting clothing, as you're reaching over a Bunsen burner, may catch on fire. So just be careful with what you wear on lab days. The reason why we don't want you to wear sandals is because if a hot liquid spills, it's going to go right down the apron. It's going to go where? Right to your feet, and your feet are going to be burned. Or if it's an acid, your feet are going to be burned by the acids. Now, a regular shoe you can usually take off pretty quickly before it gets to your toes. But if you have an open-toed shoe, wow, it's going to burn right away. Turn off all equipment when finished. Also, wash your hands with soap and water after every lab. Even if it doesn't seem like a dirty lab, wash your hands. You can never wash your hands enough in a science lab. Use a dustpan and broom to clean up broken glassware, or better yet, ask me. I'll help you clean it up. And a lot of times if I see that it's broken, I'll insist that I clean it up, so that way I'll be careful. And if I get cut, well, I get cut, but it's better me than you, right? Always think before you act. The most common injuries in the classroom here are burns and cuts. And the burns usually happen as a result of people touching hot glassware, or, believe it or not, when people light matches. They burn the tips of their fingers, because a lot of people don't know how to light a match properly, so they don't get burns. And cuts happen every once in a while. They're pretty rare. Usually the most common one in here is the burn. Now, when you're working with fire and heat, when using the Bunsen burners, always wear goggles when heating things in the lab. First of all, check to make sure the burner control valve is off. And we're going to practice this in the classroom before we actually do our first lab. We'll practice using the Bunsen burners. Always light the match before you turn the gas on. And the reason for that is you don't want the gas running and all of a sudden you're fumbling with the matches and all of a sudden a lot of gas is escaping before you can light it, and woof, there's a big fireball. Hold the match off to the side at the top of the burner to light, so don't hold the match over the actual flame. Turn the gas on and turn the gas completely off when you're done using it. So you can see here's a Bunsen burner. This is what ours look like. You have the gas adjustment valve and you have the air adjustment valve. And again, we're going to practice this and I'll demonstrate this for you so you know exactly how to do it before we do our first lab. So the valves that you see, those are not water. A lot of students will mistake those for water at the sinks. Those are actually the gas valves. So if it forms a 90-degree angle with the hose, it's closed. But if you have it going straight out, so it's pointing out towards the nozzle of the hose, that means it's open. And then again, hold your hand off to the side of the Bunsen burner. Now when test tube holders, or use test tube holders, tongs, or grippers to handle hot items, don't put any part of your body over boiling liquids or flames. And you can see this person putting their arm over the Bunsen burner. Keep flammable materials away from heat. Always remember, hot glassware looks the same as cold glassware. So check the temperature using the back of your hand. And the reason for that, you still shouldn't touch your hand to the hot glassware, but if you accidentally would touch it, your reflexes would move your hand away from the hot glassware versus if you use the palm of your hand. And remember, hot glassware may shatter if it's placed under cold water. And this has happened many times throughout the year where a student will take it off, hot glassware off the Bunsen burner, and they'll put it immediately under the cold water to try and cool it off quickly, and it cracks. So just like the glassware cool off, the bottom line, here's a rule of thumb. If you can hold the glassware in your hand, it might still be warm, but if you can hold it in your hand, you can put it underneath the sinks. And if a burn does occur, flush in the cold water and let me know, and we'll get some ice for it, and we'll see how bad the burn is before we see what to do next. Now here's a good way and a bad way to add water and acid. The bad way is to add water to the acid, because if you do that, sometimes it splatters, and if you add water to a large thing of acid, the acid will splatter up on you. But if you have a small amount of water and you add acid to the water, what splatters? The water splatters. When you're working with acids and bases, always wear goggles and aprons. Remember, strong acids and bases can cause serious burns. If you contact either, flush with water immediately. You may have to flush your eyes out for 20 minutes or so and flush from the inside to the outside so you don't cross-contaminate. Say if you only have one eye that has some acid in it, you don't want to get acid in the other eye. And let me know. And obviously if you get acid in it, you're probably going to be screaming. And we'll get you up here and we'll work with you on the emergency shower. We'll get you the help that you need. Contact lenses should not be worn in the lab, and the reason for that, there's really two reasons. One, if you get acid in your eye, your eye naturally wants to shut. It's hard to keep it open, so it's hard to get contact lenses out. The other reason is if we've had, not necessarily here, but in the science lab, if you get acid in your eye, a lot of times that acid will get behind the contact lens. So even as you're flushing your eye out in the eye wash, If you still have your contact lens in, the water's not rinsing out the acid behind the contact lens. So it's not one of those things where I'm going to check every time we use an acid, say, okay, who's wearing contact lenses? You just need to know that you shouldn't have them on during those days. If a spill should occur, let me know. Do not attempt to clean it up yourself. You could be injured. That's if it's a strong acid, not a spill of water, but an acid spill. We'll neutralize it, we'll take care of it, and we'll get it cleaned up. Now that does conclude our notes. If you have any questions on lab safety, please ask your science teacher. Remember, safety, it's everybody's responsibility.